All right, let's get into chapter 4. So we got a pretty short chapter here right now today, so it should be pretty easy and quick. So they wake up today in the woods where they had just been left, and Pippin and Sam are up before Frodo, and they are already eating some of the leftover food that the elves had left them the night before, and they're talking, discussing the journey ahead. Pippin asks Frodo if Gildor had told Frodo anything about the Black Riders. Frodo said no, he was only using cryptic language when discussing them, and he didn't really tell me anything about them. And Pippin makes another joke about the sniffing, asking Frodo if he asked Gildor about the sniffing, and Frodo said no, I didn't. And Pippin said, well, that seems like it might be important, again, making a joke. And Frodo said, well, if it was important, then I'm sure Gildor wouldn't have said anything about it. They go on enjoying their breakfast, and Pippin's kind of wandering around, and Frodo's watching Pippin wander and thinks to himself that there's no way that he could ask Pippin to join him. It's one thing for him to ask his friends, these young hobbits, to go across the Shire with him. It's an entirely other thing to have to ask them to leave the Shire with him. So he's decided he's not even going to do that. He doesn't even really want to take Sam with him, but he knows that he must. And he tells Sam, he says, well, I've decided today what I'm going to do is we're not even spending a day at Crick Hollow. By the time we get there, we are leaving immediately afterward. Frodo makes secondly sure that Sam is certain that he wants to come with him. So he asks him and he says, you know, it's going to be dangerous. We might not even come back. And Sam says, well, if you're not coming back, then I'm not coming back either. And then he says the famous quote from the movie as well. Sam says, don't you leave him, they said to me. Leave him, I said. I never mean to. I'm going with him, even if he climbs to the moon. And if any of those Black Riders try to stop him, they'll have Sam Gamgee to reckon with, I said. They laughed. Frodo asks who the they he's talking about is, and Sam says, the elves. And he goes on about how wonderful they are, and Frodo asks him if the elves met his expectations for what he thought they were, and he says, they seem a bit above my likes and dislikes, so to speak, answered Sam slowly. It don't seem to matter what I think about them. They're quite different from what I expected, so old and young, and so gay and sad, as it were. So they're discussing what way they're going to go from here. Frodo says, let's cut across country, and Pippin says, that'll take forever, there's no direct way across country. Frodo says, well, the road here bends north, so it's going to take us a lot longer. We can cut across. And Pippin says his famous line, shortcuts make for long delays, and that he had always expected that they would be able to stop at the inn, the Golden Perch, for the best beer in the Shire. And Frodo replies to that with, well, shortcuts make delays, but inns make longer ones. So we have our decision made out for us. We're taking a shortcut. We are not going to the inn. So they set out, and they are going through these briars. They're trying to figure out a way, which way through these thickets is the best way. Frodo thinks it's about 18 miles total they got to go until they reach the Buckleberry Ferry. And as they're pushing through, Sam says, guys, look. And they look where he's pointing up on top of a hill, and on top of that hill is nothing other than a Black Rider. Luckily, the Black Rider doesn't see them, and Pippin admits to Frodo, well, it seems that we were both making good decisions or bad decisions. It seems that the shortcut had already gone afoul because it was hard for them to go any further, and they were about to turn back around when they saw the rider, but it seems that they had just gotten undercover for the rider to not see them just in time. So they decide to press on forward and keep going with their retreat cut off, but all with knowing that the rider is somewhat on their tail, even though he can't quite get down the cliff that they took to get to where they are. The day was getting pretty bad. The woods are pretty thick. It's hard to get through. They seem to be taking longer in this woods than they expected, and there was a lot of misdirection that was going on. They couldn't quite figure out where they were, and as they are walking through, the sky opens up and begins to drizzle a little bit. So they have a little bit of rain, But they keep walking, and after a few miles longer, they decide to stop and take a lunch. And when they're taking their lunch, they have this liquid that the elves had left them in their water bottles. It is lightly golden, and they all have a drink. And when they have their drink, very soon they were laughing and snapping their fingers at Rain and Black Riders. The last few miles they felt would soon be behind them. And they were all sitting down just after their lunch, getting a little bit of relaxation in, and they decided to sing another song. Wonderful, another poem. If you have seen the extended edition of the Fellowship of the Ring, this song may be familiar to you. It's sung by Pippin and Merry inside the Green Dragon. Ho, 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 to the bottle I go, to heal my heart and drown my woe. Rain may fall and wind may blow, and many miles be still to go. But under a tall tree I will lie, and let the clouds go sailing by. But as they are enjoying their time, sitting here, drinking their whatever this is, and singing their songs as they begin the ho, ho, ho again, it is cut off immediately by a loud wail that they hear in the distance. And that wail is then answered by another one, even further off. Pippin asks if that was a bird or a beast, and if it was, it certainly isn't from the Shire. And Frodo replies that no, that was no bird or beast, that was a call. He says that was a signal. There were words in that cry, though I could not catch them. So finally they come to the end of the woods. It breaks open into open land for them, and they continue walking. The journey gets a lot easier. They find themselves in a lot of farming land and fields, not any woods anymore, and they begin to imagine the Black Riders as just phantoms of the woods that they have now finally left behind. It wasn't long before they reached the end of a field, and Pippin stops and says, I know where this is. This is Bam Furlong. This is Farmer Maggot's field. And with that, Frodo immediately has a little bit of dread, and he goes, great, one problem to the next. Pippin doesn't quite understand why Frodo feels this way. He says that Farmer Maggot has always been a good friend to the Brandybucks and the Tooks, so why are you so scared of him? He might be mean to trespassers, but he's a very nice guy. And Frodo says, well, when I was a youngster over in Brandy Hall, when I was growing up, he'd caught me a couple of times trying to take mushrooms from him, and he told his dogs that the next time they see me, they could eat me. And Pippin laughs at this, obviously, and says, well, it's about time you guys made up then. Come on, let's go. So they begin their walk toward Farmer Maggot's house. As they walk onto Farmer Maggot's land, they are immediately greeted by 3 large dogs who come bounding after them, growling and sniffing at Sam. And immediately following them is a very old, grumpy-looking, round and red-faced hobbit, asking them what they want and what they're doing on his land. Pippin, of course, goes forward and greets him, and the two immediately start talking. Farmer Maggot cheers up, smiles, asks Pippin what he's doing. He also asked if the company had seen the other man that had just left, and they said no, we hadn't seen him. And he said, yeah, he just came up the lane just a little bit ago, and he must have passed you guys on the way out. They asked who this man was, and he said he was a strange character in a black cloak who came up here. It seemed clear to the hobbits that Farmer Maggot wasn't really going to say any more unless he was able to do it in his own time, so when he invited them into his house, they obliged and came with him. At this time, Pippin introduces his 2 companions and tells Farmer Maggot that this is Frodo Baggins. You may remember him. He lived over here in Brandy Hall when he was young, and immediately Farmer Maggot's face kind of changes and goes, Baggins, is it? You all better come inside and talk with me. And so they all follow him in at that point. So inside the Maggot household, they were given a very large meal. Pippin felt that he was very well compensated for missing out on the golden perch. Sam was a little suspicious of the beer because he was suspicious of just about everybody who lives in different parts of the Shire. And after their meal, Farmer Maggot asked Pippin how it is, where they are coming from and where they are going to. And he said, you clearly didn't come up my gate or else I would have seen you. And they said, no, well, we got lost in the woods. That's how we made it to your land. We came over the fields. I hope that's okay. And Farmer Maggot replies, of course it's okay. You're allowed to cross my field whenever you feel like. Even you, Mr. Baggins, though I dare say you do still like mushrooms. Just adding a little joke there to show that he does remember who Frodo is. But then he says, it wasn't for that I remembered your name, though. And here he retells the tale of the suspicious customer, as he called him, that came up his lane. Good day to you, I says, going out to him. This lane don't lead nowhere. Wherever you may be going, your quickest way will be back to the road. I didn't like the looks of him, and when Grip came out, he took off, after one sniff with a yelp, as if he had been stung. He put down his tail and bolted off howling. The black fellow sat quite still. I come from yonder, he said, slowly and stiff-like, pointing back west over my fields, if you please. Have you seen Baggins? He asked in a queer voice, and bent down toward me. I could not see any face, for his hood fell over so low, and I felt a sort of shiver go down my back, but I did not see why he should come riding over my land so bold. Be off, I said. There's no Bagginses here. You're in the wrong part of the Shire. You'd better go back west toward Hobbiton, but you can go by the road this time. Baggins has left, he answered in a whisper. He is coming. He is not far away. I wish to find him. If he passes, will you tell me? I will come back with gold. No, you won't, I said. You will go back where you belong. Double quick. I give you 1 minute before I call my dogs. What's interesting is when you think of a black rider, you don't think of a black rider saying the word yonder. That's kind of the lower class English speech that Tolkien was trying to emulate at this time. So you'd think, why would he use that word? But then you remember in his conversation with the gaffer back in Hobbiton, the gaffer tells him that Baggins had left over yonder. And so it looks like the Ringwraith, the Nazgul, is trying to emulate the verbiage of the local population and asking where Baggins is. You can also tell that whatever language it is that they're speaking, this is not his usual language, because he's speaking in very short, very succinct sentences, very simple sentences. So afterwards, Frodo kind of asks Farmer Maggot what his advice is, Farmer Maggot, or what he thinks about the whole thing. And Farmer Maggot, in a very parochial manner, says that this is because he left Buckland and went to Hobbiton, where people are queer, and he thinks that him getting all messed up in Bilbo's affair is why this is happening, and he should have never left Buckland, and he's glad that he's coming back now, and his advice is to stay here and not get mixed up with these people, because he said, it seems like as not these guys are looking for Bilbo actually and not you, and it's probably because of Bilbo's treasure or something. So Frodo gets real uncomfortable with how close to the mark Farmer Maggot actually is without knowing it, and he kind of like clams up and stops talking a little bit and just says, you might be right, and he stares off into the fire. And while he's doing this, Farmer Maggot says to him, well, here's what we can do. It's almost sundown. We'll have another meal here, and I can take you guys on my wagon, and I will drive you to the Buckleberry Ferry instead of you having to walk there, since you already seem a little worried about walking out by yourself. So they obviously accept, and they sit down and have another meal with the family, and they get ready while the two Maggot sons bring the cart around. They all load into the back of the cart, and it's starting to get really foggy at this moment. And Farmer Maggot says that he's not going to light his lanterns until he turns back for home. That way they can possibly go completely unseen, and it'll be okay. While he's packing up the cart, his wife yells out to him, "You be careful of yourself, Maggot," she called. "Don't go arguing with any foreigners and come straight back." So I think it's kind of funny considering the story. Obviously, he's arguing with a foreigner there, but when you take into account the broader parochialism of the hobbits themselves and how insulated they are in their own communities, I find it very funny. It was 5 miles they had to travel to get to the Buckleberry Ferry. And when they finally made it, they were just about to get out of the cart when all of a sudden they hear the clip-clop of hooves in the distance in the fog. And the clip-clop starts getting closer and closer to them. So Farmer Maggot tells the 3 of them that they better hide down in the back. So they kind of cover themselves up and peek out to see what's happening. And with that, Farmer Maggot jumps off the wagon and begins walking toward where the hooves are coming from. And he shouts, "Now then, don't you come a step nearer. What do you want? Where are you going?" And the voice in the fog replies, "I want Mr. Baggins. Have you seen him?" And it was a muffled voice of Mary Brandybuck coming on a horse. So everyone shouts, "It's Mary." They're all very happy. Mary goes, "Yeah, it's me, of course. Who else would it be?" And they talk about how it had been a long journey so far. Farmer Maggot is there as well, and so Mary asks him, "Where'd you find them, Farmer Maggot, drowning in your duck pond?" And Farmer Maggot says, "No, I found them trespassing. I almost sent my dogs out on them." It's a fun little bit of hobbitry going on here at the end. Nice little relief period, so they're just having a little fun with it. So with everything seeming to be concluded, they get ready to go on to the ferry, and Farmer Maggot lights his lanterns, getting ready to leave, and he says, "Oh, I almost forgot," and he goes and grabs a basket from the wagon and hands it to Frodo. And he says, "These are with compliments from Mrs. Maggot." And so Frodo picks up the basket, opens it up, and there was a smell of mushrooms rising out of it. And that's the end of chapter 4, A Shortcut to Mushrooms. I hope you all are enjoying this series. I am certainly enjoying doing it and looking forward to reading the rest of the series. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Don't forget to like and subscribe.